All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Don't want to. It's late, so I don't want to take too much time. I know we're probably gonna have a lot of questions. Just double check, can we still see the slide?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So welcome everybody. This is the follow-up meeting for the River Falls Drainage Assessment Study. The study was concluded earlier this year, and so we're gonna go over just kind of go over the study, talk a little bit about interpreting it, and go over some of the results and conclusions. Just letting everybody know the meeting is being recorded. So just a couple quick things about the meeting. So we got everybody's microphones and cameras turned off. We're going to save all the questions till the end. If you want to just take a look, but it should be, I don't think anybody can turn on their stuff until the very end. So once we get to the end, we'll do question and answer. If people can raise their hands, we will unmute whoever's answering the questions, just so we can try and keep it as organized as possible. I know everyone's gonna have a lot of questions. We'll try to spend as much time as possible in questions, but we may not be able to get to everybody. I did receive all the questions that came with the responses to the meeting, and we will try and put out a response to those questions that we can post up on the drainage study website. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, we'll go through the introductions, people involved in the study. We'll go a little bit over the organizational overview of DOT and the program that conducted the study. Talk about the study structure, the 3 different phases that we went through: the site assessment, field data collection, and the H&H analysis. Talk a little bit about the results, the conclusions from those results, the next steps, and then we'll go into our question and answer session. So this is obviously through Montgomery County Department of Transportation, specifically the Division of Transportation Engineering, the Drainage Assistance Request Program under Transportation Engineering. I know a lot of you have dealt with that program before, but myself, Dan, and Kyle are the primary contacts for that program. So Dan Sheridan, who's on call, he's there. He's the Transportation Engineering Design Section Chief. Kyle Hanley is the Drainage Assistance Program Project Manager for DOT. I am a program consultant and the case manager, so I handle all the new cases and manage all of the resident correspondence and responses and the project scheduling. And then Bill Park, who's on the call as well, he's with a consultant also with GPI. He is the engineering services manager, so he oversaw the conduct of the study and the engineers and the final result. So quick organizational overview. So the Montgomery County Executive oversees DOT with the Council providing funding for DOT. DT is under DOT as one of its divisions. And then the Drainage Assistance Program is funded by 3 different CIP or capital improvement projects. This study is a completely separate funded entity from all of that. This was a separate study that was funded by a grant from the US EPA and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So the Community Resiliency Grant Program provided the funding. The EPA ultimately provided a lot of the funding for that, and then it was overseen by staff at the Department of Natural Resources Chesapeake and Coastal Services Center. So what's the reason for the study? So I'm sure, as all of you have experienced, there have been a lot of, or at least several flooding incidents over the past few years. Some pretty severe flooding on a variety of streets in the River Falls neighborhood. A lot of storm drains overwhelmed, some storm drains that had actually been letting water out of the system, flooding of streams, and property damage, vehicles and homes. So, 2 of the real big storms were the July 8th, 2019 storm, That was calculated basically since there was such an intense rainfall within a single hour. Basically, it was a 1,000-year storm event. It got something like 5¼ inches in 1 hour. So the other big one was the September 1st, 2021, which was Hurricane Ida, and the OEM calculated that to be basically a 200 return period storm. Again, both of these storms, although they did not dump records amount of water for a day, they did dump a record amount of water for a very short period of time. Both of these storms were under an hour. I believe that the Hurricane Ida one may have even only been a half an hour. So in general, Montgomery County DOT designs drainage system for a certain size of the return period. These are the ones you see that are the 10-year or the 100-year, like you would see with a FEMA floodplain. The Montgomery County drainage design criteria currently is for the 10-year design storm. So just a couple things about what the return period means. So the return period does not mean that the storm should only happen every 10 years. What it means is that there's a 10% chance in any 1 year that a storm of that intensity could happen. These probabilities are based on past observational records. So looking back in time, they determine what kind of frequency that we should see from various types of rainfall. These are based on a 24-hour storm model. So short storms that last only half an hour or an hour, if they dump the equivalent of a 10 or even a 2 or 1 year storm, but in a very short period of time, it can still exceed the storm drain design criteria. And so what we've been trying to do, and we've been able to do only for a couple of storms, it's very difficult to find, in some cases, the data that is granular enough to do these kinds of estimates, but that when you extrapolate out from a half an hour, many of these storms would essentially be a 200 or 500 or 1,000-year storm. There's been at least 5 storms in the past 5 years in the county that have had an hourly rainfall significantly exceeding that 10-year design capacity and caused flash flooding throughout the county. So what the study is for is basically the study evaluated the built storm system capacity and then make recommendations for improvements. Just as a reminder for everybody and for those who have not been involved yet, that the funding was for the study only. There's been no money yet appropriated for any kind of construction or additional looking into the system or design. So right now we are just going over the study. Everything from design and construction is going to be determined at a later date. Project selection, prioritization, and funding. The risk and severity, again, can be reduced in the future. The scale is not yet known, but regardless of the scale, it is not going to be possible to completely eliminate all risk from storms. And so we'll talk a little bit about the end about some resiliency and some measures you can take to make yourselves more secure during storms. So the study was basically broken into 3 parts. There was the preliminary site assessment. This was done in the office and record gathering. The field data collection, you may have seen some surveyors and other staff out in the field doing work. And then the hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, which was the engineering calculations to calculate the capacity of the storm drain system compared to the rainfall we would see. So the preliminary site assessment, the data gathering, so hydrology and hydraulic information, the area, the floodplain data, land uses, record plats, property owners, easements and restrictions, environmental constraints, road plans, water and sewer utilities. So this was all gathered mostly from public record, some of it from the county's GIS systems. Generally, the area is high density residential, R200. These are single family homes, minimum net lot area of 20,000 square feet with a 25% average impervious surface. The storm drain system was cataloged. It is a separate system than the sanitary sewer, which is managed by WSSC. The systems do not connect and are not allowed to be connected, so completely separate. Again, the system was installed about 200 different pipes or 22,000 linear feet, about 180 structures, multiple piped streams. And then the two major drainage areas we looked at were the northern area centered around the storm drain running down Rock Run Drive, and then between the different or perpendicular to the various streets in the north area, ultimately outfalling near Rock Run, and then the southern drainage area with the stream running through the private conservation property and eventually outfalling down near MacArthur Boulevard. Soils in the study area were primarily B soils, which is pretty typical for Montgomery County. These are moderately well-drained soils. But what you can see from the map is that there are some low-lying areas along the paths of the previous streams that are poorer drained soils than the majority of the soils. So in the lower drainage area, we have a few sections of D soils down here, which are very poorly drained. In the northern area, we have some CD soils and some BD soils. So both of those areas indicate that these are where stream valleys used to be, and the water within that area is not going to percolate into the ground very well. So during the field data collection, we picked up the pipe size and condition, structure size, location, condition. We confirmed all the drainage areas to all the different structures. This was done ahead of our field survey. So then the field survey team went out. They actually took the GPS location of all the structures. They measured the structures, did the elevations of the top, the bottoms, the inverts. The invert would be the bottom of the pipe on the inside. And then the inverted elevation of all the pipes. This is what allows us to get the information on the slope and the capacity of the pipes. We did a wetland and waterway identification to locate all of the currently existing above ground streams, and then any wetlands located in the study area that might affect the hydrology. They also scoped out potential BMP locations for the best management practice, which is a quality stormwater management that we are hoping to install as part of the remediation program. So this is just a quick example of some of the results of the detail of the field survey. You know, they picked up all the corners of all the structures, all of the pipes and the pipe inverts, all the elevations and the pipe system connectivity. There were a few structures that were not able to be accessed, either because they were too heavily buried, or they were in an inaccessible location that would have required damaging some kind of a structure to get to. So that was in the very minority. Most of the structures were able to be picked up. So we have a very detailed map of the system now, and we're going to be using that to improve the county's current GIS system. Wetlands and waterways, I mean, there's a stream at the outfall down near the pool where the system running from that north drainage area. And then there's a stream that runs through the conservation property between River Falls and Masters Drive. There were a couple of very small wetlands, but for the most part, it was pretty steep, so there was not a lot of wetlands in the area. They scoped out potential BMP locations, so they identified over 50 different locations that were good for BMPs. These areas are open and flat within the county's right-of-way with limited tree and utility disturbance. The soils would be tested at the time to see if they are also amenable to that kind of facility. So for the hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, just to go over a few terms here, just to make everybody a little aware of the way that this is calculated. So the primary variables that we're looking at here are the drainage area. So this is the area actually draining to the individual inlets. The runoff coefficient, which is the amount of runoff basically flowing off of a particular piece of land. It's affected by the surface type. Is it a house or a yard? What kind of zoning is it? What kind of soils are there, and what kind of slope? We have the rainfall intensity. That's, as I discussed before, based on historical documentation of rainfall. So this is the typical amount for our model storm. The time of concentration, which is the time for the runoff to flow to the most distant point in the drainage area. This is affected by piping and curbing and impervious surfaces and how quickly the runoff will turn into a channelized flow in a yard or in the street. And then finally, the discharge quantity, which is the amount of discharge in cubic feet per second that eventually ends up concentrated at our point of interest, which would be our inlets in the system. So the hydraulic analysis then, using that hydrology for the amount of water reaching the inlet and then reaching the pipe, we would then do two different analyses. We did the closed storm drain analysis. This looks at all the individual pipe sections by themselves. Are they capable of handling the runoff calculated to come to them, both from upstream pipes and any individual inlets at that pipe? Then we also did a hydraulic grade line analysis. This is a little bit more in depth. This starts lower in the system and takes into account other factors such as back pressure, headwater conditions, and pressure conditions in the pipe. For the closed storm drain analysis, so slope generally increases the runoff velocity through the system, and this will increase our Q max, which is the capacity of our pipe. So when we're looking at the closed storm drain analysis, the important factor that was called out was whether the existing pipe was at a slope that could accommodate the amount of runoff calculated coming to it. So this is just an example of the input that went into the system for calculation. So you can see all these green areas are individual drainage areas, and then the storm drain system with all of the inlets receiving the water from those drainage areas. So this is just an example from the report of the calculation sheet. If you want to look at any of the individual calculations, you can reference back to the report. It's going to be a little hard to read here, but I just wanted to give an example of how to read this. So if you look at the top, you'll see a lot of the variables I just discussed in the previous slide. But the important thing is these two columns right here. This is the minimum required slope to handle the amount of runoff coming to a pipe, and then the actual slope of the pipe as installed. And there were quite a few pipes throughout the system that were undersized for the current 10-year storm design criteria based on these calculations. Again, this is all from the report. You can go back and reference this and look at all the individual sections if you're interested. But it is showing that in the red lines here that there are quite a few different sections of pipe that are undersized for the current 10-year design standard. But then there's also a decent number of sections that currently do meet the standard. The most concerning of these being the pipes that are the primary system pipes running down and collecting everything down to the outfall. As these pipes back up, they can actually then reduce the capacity of the other pipes by backing up water into them. So having these pipes in the lower part of the system be undersized can also affect the pipes that are properly sized in the upper drainage area. And then this is just the other two pages. So pretty much every system in the project area had undersized pipes, except for the system that goes to outfall 7, which is down by MacArthur Boulevard and runs up to the stream behind Stable Lane. That system actually showed to be currently capable of carrying the 10-year design storm capacity. This matches with a previous higher level study that we did a few years ago, looking at that system in particular, and it showed that we did have capacity in that system, which it does appear that we do. But again, that's only for the 10-year storm. Larger storms may still overwhelm that system. So then for that system, what we would expect to see with those undersized pipes and how they would affect the properly sized pipes, we looked at the hydraulic grade line analysis. So this is beginning at the crown of the outfall pipe, which is the pipe that eventually discharges into the stream. And then it runs back up the system from there, looking at the pipe loss and structure energy loss. The hydraulic grade line analysis basically accounts for pressure. It accounts for pipes in the lower part of the drainage area being full and unable to take any more capacity. Just to quickly illustrate what the hydraulic grade line means, if you've got your pipe system and you've got your hydraulic grade line, sometimes that hydraulic grade line can be in the pipe, sometimes it can show above the pipe. But essentially what it's saying is when you have a hydraulic grade line, if the pipe is full and under pressure from the system above, if you put a hypothetical vertical column into that pipe, the structure, say a manhole inlet, if the hydraulic grade line is above the pipe, that would be the elevation of the water in that structure during the pipe pressurization. So, if the pipe is full, if the pipe is under pressure, it will actually push water up out into structures above. Why this is important is that when the hydraulic grade line goes above the ground level, then you would expect to see flooding because the pipe and structure would now be completely full, not allowing the admittance of any more water into the system. So the hydraulic grade line analysis looked at all of these different pipe systems sections on the downstream area in particular, and whether or not the hydraulic grade line showed above the surface, which would indicate that it would be a risk of flooding. And if you look in the report, it is that last column on the hydraulic grade line analysis that indicates whether or not that is the case. And again, these maps are from the report. We did this hydraulic grade line analysis on all the large parts of the storm drain system, and it showed that pretty much the entire main part of the system from the outfall had the hydraulic grade line above the ground for the 10-year storm, meaning there is a backwater condition caused by both the stream and the larger pipes at the end of the system that are preventing the water from then properly draining through the rest of the system at the desired capacity. So what this means is that both of these analyses showed that for the current 10-year storm design, the system does not accommodate the amount of runoff that we would like. The analysis indicated many of the sections were below the county standard, and that the hydraulic gradient for at least 3 of the outfalls showed that it was higher than the current county standards. What this means is, and again, these maps are in the report, the light blue here is showing areas that are sumps. Essentially what a sump is an area where the only way for the water to drain out of those areas is through the underground storm drain system. The above ground path has either been blocked by housing or some other obstruction. And so in these areas, you would expect to see, if the storm drain is at capacity, flooding. And I think this map pretty much lines up exactly what the neighborhood has been seeing. We see a lot of potential flooding in the community pool grounds, on all of the streets running perpendicular to that main storm drain system. So, Coast Street, River Falls Drive, Hackamore Drive up there. And then this map on the left-hand side also shows Hackamore. So this is pretty much lining up with what we've heard reported from the residents and what's been seen as far as when the storm drain's overwhelmed, these are areas that are going to flood. Now, this is not the only areas that may flood, but these are the ones that we would predict based on the topographic analysis. And then for the lower drainage area, so just as so you can kind of see how this works. So you've got the C&O Canal, obviously is always full of water for the most part, or is designed in such a way that it will fill up with water because there's no outlet to it except for the storm drains. There's also this line of channels behind MacArthur Boulevard, but then there's these other areas down at the end at that MacArthur Boulevard culvert, at the end of the MacArthur Boulevard side road, that we would expect to see flooding, and we do. And then Stable Lane, which has had flooding, and then above Stable Lane at the end of that stream. There's also some areas up on Masters Drive. So essentially, why is this the way that it is? Well, both of these systems used to be natural streams. So, when there's natural streams generally have wide banks. They've got broad floodplains. They've got a lot of room for the water in a large storm to spread out. When you convert this type of a system, a natural stream system, into a pipe system, you've now set your maximum capacity to whatever your pipe is, and everything else flowing during a larger storm flowing over the surface is going to run into places it's not really meant to go. And some of you may have seen this before. So looking at the old neighborhood plan, they actually showed the old stream, which ran right through all of these perpendicular to all of these streets. When they installed the neighborhood, then they put in this storm drain system pipe to replace that stream. And this is where we're seeing most of our flooding. And so you can see here, this is the end of the system. This is a 72-inch pipe that is the ultimate discharge for the system. This is one of our engineers' object. And you can see for comparison how large the system is discharging out of this neighborhood. So this is a extremely large system carrying an old historic stream that is now piped with no other additional capacity above ground. Same thing within the south. There was a historic stream that ran down through the neighborhood, which is now piped only in several sections, with the ultimate end of this pipe being a 66-inch reinforced concrete pipe discharging into the stream near MacArthur Boulevard. So for the conclusions, so again, significant portions of the storm drain system are below the 10-year design criteria. The pipe streams perpendicular to the roadway with sumps from runoff can escape. So we've got this system now where a stream has lost all of its original topography and is attempting to convey the stream through a fixed capacity pipe. Anything above that capacity as designed is going to flood. And unfortunately, the current system does not even meet our current 10-year design criteria, although we cannot exactly say what it would have been at the time of construction. The cost estimate based on installing a system to meet the current 10-year design standard was essentially $3.7 million. And then the recommended BMP build out, this would be for water quality and also some upstream infiltration and retention, was estimated at just over $2 million. These cost estimates were for installation only. So this is essentially just for putting those pipes or those BMPs in the ground. There are a lot of other costs that could be project specific that were not calculated. These are things that would require a lot more research, such as utilities and soils and things like that, that could raise the price, plus any kind of traffic control and things like that, which were not figured in. So this is a baseline cost. Any kind of project that we pursued would be more than that if the entire plan was to be implemented, or the entire recommendation, excuse me. So what are we going to do about it? So over the next 6 to 8 months, DOT is going to evaluate these recommendations to determine the most impactful improvements. The current budget does not allow anywhere near the entire recommended improvement to bring this up to the 10-year storm. So what is going to need to happen is we're going to look at the individual improvements that could be made. We're going to look at installing some of these upstream BMPs. These are going to be primarily for water quality, but they do provide some residency time for runoff, and they also allow some infiltration. Every little bit helps, and they could definitely at least reduce some of the issue. We're going to look at some strategic pipe replacements. So we will look at those pipes that are either most undersized or are causing the most backup to the system above, and see if there's a decent way to replace a few of those pipes to upsize them to increase the overall capacity and functioning of the system without completely replacing it. We're going to look at adding additional inlet capacity. There were a lot of inlets that were smaller that could have been increased in size. Although if the pipe is at full capacity, that would not help. Getting the water into the system as fast as possible is important. And if we can increase inlet size, if nothing else, it can reduce the flooding time by allowing the floods to go into the system more quickly. But in some areas, the pipe capacity may actually be above the inlet capacity. And so we could get a little bit of additional capacity out of increasing inlet size. And then we'll look at potential overflow structures, attempting as best we can to, within those sump areas, provide some kind of a safe path for the water to flow over the surface to avoid going into residencies and causing other property damage. Just to talk a little bit about a couple projects that have already been done. So we had this project at above Stable Lane that was a pipe realignment to try to reduce clogging primarily. Didn't actually increase the system capacity, but it did increase the efficiency of the system and the ability of the system to avoid clogging. And then we're about to go into construction for the unclogging of the MacArthur Boulevard culvert. We're at the very last stages of permitting. Once those final permits are in, we can put them onto the construction schedule with the construction contractor. And then just to give a couple of examples of some BMPs. These are some BMPs that have been done elsewhere in Montgomery County, Arcola Avenue, Kemp Mill, a few places where we've got some median type systems here, bioretentions. We've got some curb bump outs here to extend into the travel lane, or the shoulder lane here. This does sometimes reduce parking, but it can both reduce the amount of impervious by removing some of that asphalt out of the street, and then also providing a place for water to store and infiltrate. So these are some practices we're going to be looking at throughout the neighborhood to install as much as possible to improve both the water quality and the residents' time of the runoff. And then again, everybody in the neighborhood can assist with this. Every house produces runoff, every impervious surface produces runoff, patios, roofs, everything like that. It is best for everybody in the neighborhood as much as possible to help and increase the retention time of water on your property. If you don't already have, any new houses require stormwater management, but if you don't have stormwater management, installing will definitely help the system downstream. So putting in things like rain barrels, rain gardens, even tree planting. And again, you can go to the Montgomery County website to the Rainscapes program. That's a program through DEP. They offer some financial matching for certain types of stormwater management. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. And if you don't have any stormwater management on your property, putting it on your property would help all of your neighbors and yourself to reduce the issues. And then preparedness, again, we are going to attempt to look at the best solutions moving forward, those things that can be done under our current budget, those things that might need to be pushed off to another capital improvement project or some other kind of grant funding. But regardless of what happens, there's no way that we can install enough stormwater drainage to completely eliminate the risk of any flooding in the neighborhood. There's 200,000-year storms, even 25 or 50-year storms. That is not currently what the county is designing for. And those storms are still going to have the capacity to cause flash flooding. So it's important that if you've had a flash flood, if you've had flood damage, if you're in areas that might be at risk in those low spots, that you become prepared. These are natural disasters. Risk can't be eliminated. You do not need to be in a floodplain to get flood insurance. The Maryland Insurance Administration through the state of Maryland can provide a lot of information on how to get flood insurance, but also the Montgomery County Office of Emergency Management and the website that I've shown there. If you just go to montgomerycounty.gov/flooding, there's a lot of new resources on there for flooding issues and how to prepare yourself. I think there's also a couple different county-wide community meetings coming up if you want to be involved and understand better the county-wide flood management studies, the climate action plan, and what the county is doing as a whole to look at more climate and more flooding issues. So before we go to questions, I'll just let you know, again, this is a quick overview. The study is available to everybody if you want to take a look at it and see anything specific about your area or an individual pipe. Again, the funding was only for this study. Nothing has yet been decided about any kind of construction moving forward. Within the next few months, we are going to be looking at how to proceed with that. And so with that, I'll open it up to questions now. Lori, I guess I'll let you, if you want to let me know who is raising their hand. I'll try to answer as much as I can, or I will get Dan or Kyle or Bill to help if I need.
Okay, first we have Jeff Gagliardi. Jeff, would you unmute, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Not now.
Let's see if I can.
Where did
Jeff, we cannot hear you.
Let's see.
Looks like he's unmuted now. Jeff?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Ah, there you go. So I have a question. I have a couple questions. One has to do with, and this may be a minor point, may not be, but I think it goes to both the tone and then the intent of where we're going with this and how the county views it. And that is this characterization that it's a 1,000-year storm. The reason why I question that is because I've read through your report, I've read the materials, and it's based on what I view in reading this, a single data point of a community volunteer reporting that they had a 5.27-inch rainfall recorded at their station. So it's a single data point, number one. Number two, they said much of the rain of that 5 inches, much, fell in about an hour centered around 8:15. They did not say all of it. They did not say how much of it. And with that information, the county seems to have taken that number, put it into their chart that, okay, 5 inches is a 1,000-year storm. As far as I see it, there's no data that supports it's a 1,000-year storm based on what's produced in the report. And it doesn't even give us enough information on that, quote, much of the rain to say whether it was a 25-year or a 50-year. And I understand your point that you designed for 10-year, but I think the characterization that this is a 1,000-year is a suggestion to everyone that there's maybe a bias here that we can't really affect this. Whereas if it was a 25-year or a 50-year or a 30-year, I think it goes more towards, yes, this is something that maybe we can have more of an effect on. So I think part of it's psychological, and I think that's also important in getting the funding. If this is viewed as, oh, it's just a 1,000-year storm, it's not going to occur again, then maybe not much is going to be done with it. So I'd like your response to that. And then the second part, if you'd like me to hold, the second part had to do with measures that could be taken here at the house. And I've got more information about where we are on, we're on Coach Street, right near the storm drain, close to the leg that follows through the community sidewalk to Horseshoe. And our home received a substantial flood wall coming out of the storm drain through the basement, filled out about 10 feet, blew out in the backyard, blew through the garage. And short of creating a seawall 360 degrees around the house, I don't know what measures take at the house to ameliorate that. And if you know anything about flood insurance, they don't cover most damage in a basement. They'll cover very limited damages in a basement. So if you could address those items.
Sure. So as far as the storm goes, I agree with you. So, you know, we work with the best data we can, and it is not the granularity we need to do the predictions are not there. So these storms have been extremely heavy and short and extremely localized. Most rain gauge data is at most the hour level, if not only a 6 or 12 or 24-hour type of level. It also depends on how close it is to the site. So we tried to find something we could get as absolutely close. A couple of these storms have been so localized that individual neighborhoods in the county were getting flooding where others did not. Some of them were countywide, but some were just they just cut certain swaths through the county. So, we had to take the best data that we could find that would indicate, something we could try to estimate. And then again, with a 1,000-year storm, this was looking, the return period storm is based on a 24-hour storm. So this was basically extrapolating out from an hour and saying, what would be the 24-hour equivalent for the storm? And that's not something that is particularly, it doesn't mean anything besides just trying to estimate what this storm equivalent is when trying to compare it to the capacity of the system. And I don't think that saying that it's a 1,000-year storm equivalent means that we don't expect to see it again. I think we've seen enough of these really intense storms over the past few years that we're not dismissing it. I think that, even a 25-year storm is still significantly above design capacity currently. So I don't think that, again, there's going to be a dismissal of this as we can't get the system up to 1,000. We can't really get the system up to 25. And in fact, as you can see, based on the estimates, we're not sure we can get the system up to the 10 completely, at least not under the current design standard. So I think that the key moving forward is the county is going to focus on what improvements can be made that will provide the most improvement to the neighborhood, that will provide the absolute most increase in capacity for the amount of budget that can be put into it. And then as far as the individual homeowners go, it's going to be site to site. I do agree with you that there's going to be a certain amount of water that's essentially going to be almost impossible to keep out of the home. We don't necessarily, it's not necessarily feasible to completely block up a basement to keep out the water. I think that as far as a site by site goes, it's probably the best thing is to consult with an engineer and talk about it. I guess, I don't know, Dan, what would be your, I guess I'll let you kind of chime in here.
Yeah, I'll touch on the first point again, right? Matt's right in that we are relying on, in this case, a single point of data. And what we're trying to do there is just kind of get the order of magnitude. And by saying it's 1,000-year, again, Matt touched on the point that what we're seeing is these short duration, high intensity storms that are problematic. And so we, as the county and other jurisdictions, are also like grappling with this issue, just because we just say, to us, it's a measure of, this was a really intense storm. It's going to be beyond the capacity of any storm drain that we had out there. So that's really what we're looking for there. And the accuracy of that one data or whatever point is right, is like debatable. Maybe it's something less than that. But it, again, as Matt mentioned, it doesn't mean that we're going to disregard it because it was just so much. But it is an indicator to us that, yeah, this was a flood, right? This was a flood event. And so again, yeah, the individual things that can be done at a house, again, the county is going to look at what we can do. We're going to try to install some see what BMPs would be effective. If there's some certain pipes we can upsize. But as Matt has mentioned, that we can't get rid of all the risk. And so then an individual property owner could get a site engineer that has experience in these types of flood mitigation measures, and they can help you with a potential solution to personally mitigate impacts to a single property.
Dan and Matt, if you don't mind if I jump in just for a moment, you all are obviously not familiar with what property I'm speaking about, but just to give you an idea of the concern here and the facts that we have on the ground, it's a very flat property. It's 8101 Coach. It's right near one of the infalls to the storm drain system. It's, as I mentioned before, the sidewalk that cuts through to Horseshoe Lane. There's nothing that we as homeowners could do engineering wise, being that it's flat, almost, just maybe a few feet of the house, just a few feet above the storm drain level. And to sort of roll back to 2019, we would understand if there was flash flooding and it overtook the storm drain system ability to get it out, and that water just sort of flowed downhill and it just sort of ponded there. That's one thing. But over the years, we have experienced water coming out of the storm drain system in the past. Matt referred earlier to the hydraulic line, hydraulic grade lines. We've had manhole covers blow out in the middle of that street multiple times since I was a child in 1974 till now, from the pressure in that system. Now you've explained why that happened. Now I understand why that happened. So we have that going on. And in this particular incident, the water's collecting elsewhere. It's running through that storm drain system. It's not just coming from somewhere else. I'm sure some of it topped over from the sidewalks, but water literally was coming out of the storm drain system as well. It's backed up further down. we can't do anything about that. If the storm drain system is going to be adding water at that point, which then adds to whatever water's there and blows through the house, that leaves in a very precarious situation. My mother's 82 this year. She was out of her house for, what was it, 3, 4, 5 months the last time. All the building mechanicals were wiped out, nothing covered by insurance. Everything we had in the basement, which was a lot, is lost. You can't expect homeowners to continue to go through that every so many years. We don't live down, you know, on the coast in hurricane country. You don't expect this to be coming out of your storm drain and flooding you. So yes, we understand that if there's a 25-year storm, there might be 6 feet of water, you know, or a 6-foot pond or a 50-foot wide pond down in the street. But what we don't want is it to come all the way up the lawn, all the way through the garage, blow out the back of the house, and destroy the bottom of the house again. I presume everybody in that same area wants the same thing. I think everybody would be perfectly satisfied if the storm drain was, you know, reached capacity and there was extra water in the street for a few hours. What we don't want is it blowing through our houses again.
Yes, and I'm also going to go back to one of the points that Matt made, where there are some sump locations along the storm drain system. So I'm assuming that's one of them, where the only way out for the water is through the storm drain system. And then when that system is over capacity and water's actually back pressuring coming out of it, then yeah, that's a problem. So those are the areas that we're going to be keying on. We understand the, you know, the issue within the storm drain, and then how it impacts, you know, properties in those that are in those sump areas.
All right, Lori. We can move
Okay.
on.
Yeah. Next, we'll hear from Stephen Benz.
Hi, can you hear me? This is actually Lynn Sherburne-Benz. Steve and I are together.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. First of all, thank you very much for doing this study and for coming and explaining this to us this evening. It's very, very helpful. Again, I agree with everything that was just said, but I had two quick points. It seems to me it would be fairly easy to do a sensitivity analysis. So we've done this for 10 years, just do the multiplier. What about a 25-year flood? What about a 50-year flood? What about a 100-year flood? I mean, forget the 1,000-year flood. But I think, you know, doing that sensitivity analysis would give us a little bit more information. And then I think it'd be really critical to look at what is the marginal cost of meeting a 25-year storm versus a 10-year storm. Because if you're going to have to lay down pipes, you know, lay a pipe that's got, you know, 4 feet more in diameter, or 3 feet more diameter, that would only be a marginal increase in cost. But I think it'd be really useful to do this analysis, the sensitivity analysis and the marginal cost, because that would give decision makers, policy makers a little bit more of a sense of what their choices and what their options might be. Because I'm guessing it's a marginal cost, it's not a multiple cost. Just an idea. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. And so I can address that real quick. So the cost really depends. So in some cases it could be marginal if you've got ideal conditions. The issue is that when you go up to a 25-year, the pipes become substantially larger. And what happens is you start getting utility conflicts, which relocating utilities is very, very expensive. You end up with situations where you don't have the elevations you need at the downstream end. So there's going to be a limit, for instance, on the current stream elevation at the end for the maximum size of pipe, because you have roads and houses running over the top of it. I guess not houses, but I mean the road runs over the top and other landforms run over the top. So it needs to be buried, obviously. And so, you know, you've got a maximum size to meet that existing stream. The only other choice being to lower the stream, which is an extremely expensive prospect. So yes, it can be marginal. And I think that is a good suggestion as far as running that marginal analysis and, you know, upgrading even larger than the 10-year storm if possible. But it is really going to be site dependent on whether it is actually a marginal cost or a multiple cost. And that would just be something we'd have to look at.
And I'll just add on to what Matt has said. So I think it's a great idea. and the first step was to go out and get the detailed analysis that we have, right? And we're showing it. And so already some of that is being done in that we might have multiple pipes that are, don't carry the 10-year storm, but we need to focus on the areas that are also adjacent to these sump areas. And so we can concentrate on those areas, and perhaps the sensitivity analysis says that our money is best spent draining those areas and leaving the rest the way it is, or perhaps doing some BMPs also to give us some storage in the system upstream. So yeah, that's exactly what we can do in the next 6 to 8 months to we have limited resources and dollars, so we want to get the biggest bang for the buck, and that's exactly what we'll be doing. And now we have the information to do it.
And I think I could say that, the first goal of any improvement is going to be to reduce as much as possible property damage. It's not going to be to make, we're not just going to upgrade systems because it says that it's undersized. We're going to look at those systems that are causing damage and try to mitigate that first.
And one more follow on is that, these things roll downhill. So, once you start enlarging an area, the next, you don't want to just push it to the next downstream spot. So there is some continuation we'll have to look at as well.
Okay, Kristen, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you very much. And thank you for working so hard to raise the money to even fund this study, because clearly it wasn't something included in a budget. So just as a neighbor who is substantially affected, I appreciate and all the hard work you guys put into this. I have a couple of questions and comments. First was that we might have been a little bit of the canary in the coal mine at our location on Stable Lane, because our catastrophic $100,000 flood happened in 2016. And actually in our area, it's been happening longer than 2016, like Jeff said. I mean, these floods, especially in these critical areas as demonstrated on your map, have been happening on and off, it looks like, for many years. Now, I thought in the report, it said one of the reasons potentially that our storm drainage, regardless of climate change and increased rain lately, one of the reasons that we may not have adequate storm drainage is because some of the homes were built on natural floodplains and near streams that were supposed to be used as part of the storm drainage plan along with the constructed storm drains. Is that true?
So, so the houses were definitely built on what now would be considered floodplains, but back in the 1960s, the design criteria and the considerations were different. They focused a lot more on the larger 100-year floodplains. So, I guess under current county design review by Department of Permitting Services, there are probably homes within this neighborhood that would no longer be allowed to be constructed in certain areas. But at the time of construction, that was not considered to be a poor practice, I suppose. And so there are definitely some homes that were constructed in areas that would not be constructed on today. As far as, floodplains go, yeah, I mean, pretty much any kind of stream always has some kind of a floodplain. So if you're near the stream, you probably were in the previous floodplain. But again, they didn't really delineate those things back then and make those kind of determinations. They just took the runoff coming to the stream at whatever point, and then they built a pipe that they thought would be sufficient to carry a particular storm.
Do you have any idea what percentage of the floodplains are currently occupied or obstructed by homes?
I have some insight into that. So Matt talked about it earlier. The county is looking at flooding countywide, and they've actually hired a consultant to look at like flood management on the countywide at all different parts of the county that have a stake in this. There's emergency management, there's Department of Permitting Services that issues. Now we have a thing that's called a floodplain permit that didn't even exist back when these houses were built. There's Department of Environmental Protection that you know, is responsible for stream quality. Again, another practice that happened back then that wouldn't be done today is piping a stream. It just, you know, it's not good environmentally, but it, you know, it was done a lot all the way up until, I don't know, maybe the 1980s or something like that. So the county is looking at it globally and, you know, trying to wrap it, you know, it's you know, get an idea of what the cost of flood mitigation is in the county. What are some things that, you know, should we be changing our design standards to something instead of a 24-hour storm? Should it maybe be a 6-hour storm or something like that? And looking at different parameters, but you know, and then what would be, you know, are there policy changes that should be made and things like that as far as building permits or, you know, allowing some of this kind of stuff. But it's, you know, it's, and then what would be, you know, what are the cost of policy changes and things like that, and how, you know, so there's a bigger again, countywide study that's going on. Again, you alluded to, we got this money from a grant a few years before that study started, and it's just, you know, it was a, I mean, it's this climate action plan. We're seeing more intense, more frequent storms, and you know, higher rainfall in a short amount of time, and that's, you know, the system wasn't designed for that. You know, not just in the county, but all over the country. I mean, this is kind of standard design. And just looking, we're trying to take a look at it. So I don't know if that's answered your question, but there's a bigger thing. You know, things have been built, right? So what do we do with the things that are built, and then, you know, going forward, how future things get built?
I have one more follow-up question. In your presentation, you were talking about the capacity of the drains, and it sounded like there was one that currently met criteria, and it sounded like it was the one on Stable Lane. But isn't that because it was just completely renovated 2 years ago?
No, so that
you're-
project was actually pretty small, and there was really no capacity increase with that. But again, the only thing the study was saying was that it meets the current 10-year criteria. I would doubt that it would meet the 25. So for these really large storms, you're still going to see flooding there. And again, not even the really largest storms. Again, if it's above the 10 is a 10% chance in any particular year you could have something above the 10. Obviously, the severity will matter for how much it ends up flooding, but the frequency could be substantially higher. So, yeah, so it does meet the 10, but not necessarily.
Or, I mean, you did something when you renovate. You did
So
something.
let me. Matt touched on it earlier, so it's a subtle point. So the existing storm drain system did meet the 10-year storm criteria. But what we did was we noticed. In one of those storms, we went to the manhole, and the manhole was just clogged with very large woody debris. And one of the reasons was that the manhole itself had a step in it. So a pipe came in at a certain elevation, and the next pipe went out at a lower elevation, and that didn't. And one of the parts of the project was they made that manhole more efficient so that larger sticks could flow through. And that's also what we did at the inlet. We you know, when we went out to check it in 2016, there's a lot of woody debris at the inlet, and so the efficiency of that inlet was improved so that, you know, if a stick did flow through, it would flow through the system and not get caught up and cause a clog that, you know, we wouldn't know about until later. So that was some efficiency just to the inlet and to the one manhole that was severely clogged, but the size of the pipes wasn't changed.
Is that kind of analysis of fixing all the drains that might do that? Is that somehow addressed in the report? It can't be that our drain is the only one that did that.
Well, there might be other instances where that happens, but
Yeah, we can look at that, but the report was primarily for capacity, which doesn't take into account those kind of, that's kind of a separate issue. But we have all the information now. I mean, it's all been surveyed in, so those things can now be looked at as well.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the key things at that location was that there was already existing utilities that went in before the storm drain. So the upper section of the storm drain was put over top of all the major utilities. And then
Yeah.
they were just letting the inlet structure be like a drop structure, and then the lower pipe would carry out at a much lower elevation. So the purpose of that one, they were trying to avoid, the electric power lines over there. So they raised that upper pipe segment and dropped it down through the manhole. Well, that whole zigzag vertically created a hydraulic inefficiency. So by us adjusting that, relocating some utilities and adjusting some manholes and inlets, that made it a lot smoother transition down through there to pass that woody leafy debris through that structure.
And-
I
and
would
I'll-
say it sure seems like it. So thank you very much. And I wish everybody else could have some kind of solution like that in the neighborhood, because I'm fingers crossed that this at least helped this tiny section of the neighborhood. So thank you.
And so I'll touch back to what Mr. Jeff, I think it's Gagliardi, mentioned earlier, is a different type of thing where he saw, the manhole lids blowing off, the covers, and then the water has no place to get out but through that, so that's a different situation, not a clogging situation, but a capacity situation. And maybe we can improve the efficiency if there, if there's that, he talks about it's the bend where it goes down to the other road. So maybe we can improve the efficiency where the storm drain makes a bend and those types of things. So yeah, we kind of have to be strategic and kind of go spot by spot, if you will, to get the most bang for the buck.
Because every pipe segment is a different situation a lot of times, dealing with slopes and utilities, and so every segment has its own challenges. So you just got to look at each one of those segments and try to come up with the most efficient pipe capacity, that you're looking at. So, but that's our next step. That's the things we need to look at.
Okay, next
right.
we have a question from Ms. Harrison.
Hi, my name is John Harrison. Sandy, or S.H. Harrison, is my wife. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay. I'd like to thank all of you. I think you've done an incredible amount of data management. And the problem I have is a very simple one. It doesn't seem that anybody is focused, and I'm not talking about you gentlemen individually. I'm talking about the or lady as well, the idea towards a solution to the problem. And the question I have, we've talked about a 10-year flood. Well, does that include climate change? Because did a 10-year flood become a 25-year flood? I've lived here for almost 25 years in the same house, and I've seen 2 hurricanes go through, and I've never seen the amount of water in my street as I saw a couple of years ago with 2 hurricanes going through. I was in Vietnam for a while. I know what a monsoon looks like. And you can literally walk down the street and drown if you don't cover your nose so you can breathe. This was not even quite to that. So is anybody looking towards really solving the problem? And I haven't heard any of that tonight.
Well, I think you're correct in that a lot of it is we have collected the data, and then we are saying we are going to look at key points and come up with individual solutions. You're right in that the intensity of the storm, it seems to be that's what's changing, compared to the long term, right? And it could be brought on by a hurricane, or it could just be certain cells lined up and the atmospheric conditions let loose, 5 inches of rain in an hour, or 3 inches of rain in an hour, and that's what's causing the backup. So yes, we are going to our next step will be to start parsing out the solution. We can't undo what's been built, but we can look to make it more efficient in the weak points and try to address this high intensity storm that we're seeing more frequently.
My follow-up really is, I was lucky. We literally suffered no dollar damage. However, I have neighbors who suffered $100, $200, $300,000 each in damage, most of which was not covered by any insurance. And if you add all that up, the $6 million it would cost to bring this up to 10 years is, to use a friend of mine's expression, bupkis.
And that's, I think, again, the issue is that this is not an isolated incident in this neighborhood, in that it happens throughout the entire county. And that's why the county is looking at, overall plans of how to deal with these situations, because, even though $6 million is, I suppose, not seemingly a large amount of money when you're looking at the county budget, if you do that in every single neighborhood, then you end up with a huge amount of money. And I think that, again, the county, through its climate action plan, is looking at these things. I think that the biggest change that will be seen first is going to be changes to the permitting and development allowances and how the county allows things to be constructed. And, if there's a change in the calculations we use to design storm drains, that's all going to affect new neighborhoods. But like Dan said, once it's already in the ground, it's very expensive, very disruptive. Again, even to bring it up to the 10-year storm, and that still would probably not solve all of the issues in the neighborhood. Putting in, and as was discussed before, we can look at, is it feasible? Is it to install a 25 or a 50-year storm? But I'm going to guess in at least some situations, if not many situations, it will be prohibitively either expensive or just not possible with the current configuration of the neighborhood to install systems like that. So, we'll look at it again on a case-to-case basis. We're going to try and do the best improvements we can in the best areas that are going to cause, help with the most amount of damage. So those property damage areas will be the focus.
That's a systemic answer to an individual problem, which makes absolutely no difference to one of my friends whose basement that they spent $200,000 on making into their family's place that was flooded. And they made a bedroom down there. And they had a person, a neighbor, a relative living. And the water blew through the windows. It blew them down. And you don't get that with a systemic answer. You get bodies. Thank you, gentlemen. I really do. I appreciate your work. I appreciate your intelligence. I appreciate your expertise. And I know it's a political problem, but either fix it or at some point somebody's going to die and you're going to have bigger problems. Good night. How about that? All right.
Any other questions or comments?
Okay. John Miller would like to know, since the county owns major property on Brickyard, aren't you responsible as well?
Brickyard Road, yeah, sure, there are county properties that have runoff as well. Yes, runoff comes off of all types of properties.
And the county is the county is required, just as any other property owner, if building, if a new road is built or a new building or something is built on county property, they follow the same permitting and stormwater management as everybody else.
Yeah, and the storm drain is designed to carry the whole watershed. So yes, those are taken into account.
Okay, we have another question from Kristen.
I thought in the report it said something about the cost for these projects might be around $6 million. I'm just wondering, how does that funding work? How do you get the money? How does it get approved? Is there some kind of perspective about this? Because someone told me, well, you might get on a list. It might be a 2 or 3 year wait before your project might come up. Is there a way to know how these funds are allocated? If you're going to do this piecemeal, was the $6 million correct? I mean, is that if every project that needed to be done was done? And how is this going to be funded? Like, what's the future for any of these solutions over the next 3 to 5 years?
So I'll take a shot at that. That's a great question, Kristen. So the $6 million was a budgetary estimate from an analysis that we did on the number of pipes that weren't meeting the 10-year design capacity. So our job in the next 6 to 8 months is to kind of, and to go back, we don't have $6 million in our storm drain budget. Our storm drain budget is actually quite small. That would be many, many years of the storm drain budget, and it's, the budget's for the entire county. So what we plan to do in the next 6 to 8 months is take a look at scoping either, and it's kind of a twofold: best management practices, things we can do to address water quality, and some amount of stormwater management or storage, and also to look at what areas would most benefit by perhaps upsizing the pipe or adding inlets or a combination of that, or making them more efficient. So that is our goal over the next 6 to 8 months, and come up with a more specific scope of work and a more specific cost estimate. And it could be that it's done over a series of years, or, if we come up with a, say it's a $3 million thing, we could put that as, it would have to compete with all other Department of Transportation projects or something like that. And to see, we'll have to talk with upper management to determine how to best attack it. So that's going to happen over the next 6 to 8 months. And at that time is when we start our we do a 6-year budget every 2 years, and that'll fit in that timeline. So to get it into the next 6-year budget, or something into the next 6-year budget, is our goal over the next 6 to 8 months.
Oh, sorry, just one follow-up question. Is there a mechanism? How would you suggest that we who live in a town of lobbyists go ahead and lobby to get attention to our project so that budget allocation comes to River Falls in this project? I mean, can we raise money? Can we hold a lemonade stand? I mean, what can we do to get monies directly?
So in general,
Besides-
I haven't heard of raising money, but that would they're always asking us to look at outside sources of money. That's where we look for the grant to do the study.
Right.
We can also, once we have a better scope or a more refined scope, perhaps the best management practices that address water quality, maybe the EPA would be willing to grant some of that. So that's one thing that we can do. We can look for grant opportunities. But what you can do as residents is, so the county executive puts forth the budget, and we in the Department of Transportation work for the county executive. And again, we'll be working on that budget we're starting to prepare it, and so you can talk to your county executive, or and then what happens after that? The county executive proposes a budget, and then the county council approves it. So your elected officials are the ones that actually approve whether a project, whether there's money there to do a project or not. So that's the way the project happens.
And the first thing I would do would be to go to that website that I show up there, montgomerycounty.gov/flooding. There are various links and flood resources that the county is putting on there, ways to get involved more. There's, like I said, 2 countywide community meetings that they've got posted up there. So there's ways to get involved through that website. Next question.
Okay, we'll hear from James.
Hi, is that me? It's Jim Harrison. I'm another Harrison, but not related directly. We live close together. But the question I wanted to raise is about the relative importance of the BMPs versus hardware or pipe capacity. It seems from reading between the lines, or not too much between the lines in the report, that the BMPs, bioswales, will not do a whole lot in terms of reducing the flood problem. If that's correct, then, do we need, that's sort of a 40% saving we could have on the property, on the project overall.
So
Am I
that's
wrong? Or
why,
maybe 20%.
yeah. Well, so that's why they were separated out. So you are correct in that the BMPs are primarily a water quality treatment instead of water quantity, although they do also have the ability to infiltrate water. The primary reason is that the county and essentially every larger municipality and county in the country has what we call the NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, MS4, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer permit. And what this is basically the EPA requiring the individual localities to treat a certain amount of their stormwater. So the county must treat a certain amount of its stormwater. It's mandated by the federal government. So this needs to happen anyway. So by putting in those BMPs, it's something the county has to do anyway. And by putting it in areas that are having flood issues, it can at least have a marginal improvement in retention times and keeping some of that water, putting it into the ground and keeping it from flowing down. So again, I think that the primary reason is that it has to be done. The county is mandated
It's not
to do
fungible.
it.
You're saying it's not fungible, basically. You can't use that water to to reduce the flood situation. No, that's what I suspected might be behind it, but
Well, no, that's not necessarily true. So for the study, we sort of had to pick, we have 53 potential sites, okay? So we had to somewhat standardize sort of one level just to quantify one, because there's many kinds of BMPs out there. There's bioswales, there's bioretentions that are a little bit larger. There's underground detention kind of systems underneath bioswales and underneath bioretention areas. You can add various kind of storm products that increase storage capacity underneath the ground, underneath all these systems. So once they get in there, they deepen there. For our study, we could only really calculate sort of a standard, but in the report we said, hey, we think through further design and more evaluation on site specific, looking at drainage area, looking at impervious area, that we might be able to get a little bit more storage in here. And by just adding different products to there, we can increase storage capacity for even just one BMP that helps storage and hopefully that we can get infiltration and promote more infiltration as well. So for our study, we just needed to pick sort of like a standard bioswale just for some treatment type. They are typically water quality, but we've been able to augment those kinds of BMPs to help them perform a little bit better. So it's almost like a bioswale or bioretention on steroids. You get it more storage in there. So, but those are things that we're going to be looking at for each one of these BMPs, because the more we can intercept before it gets into that storm drain. So it's more than just a storm drain issue. It's controlling the runoff. And if we can get them into these BMP systems, detain them, store them, slow them down before it gets there, and every little bit all adds up when you're looking at 190 acres going to that ultimate outfall. So that's why it's a combination of looking at BMPs, both even at the upper levels, and controlling that runoff before it gets down to, those perpendicular streets and coach and everything. So we look at a whole watershed management. So And that's coming up. That's coming up.
Well, that it really would need to be in the upper areas because
Yes.
there's a whole lot of area up in the upper areas. By the time you get down here at the low level of River Falls Drive, there's not a whole lot of place for storing water when you have this kind of flood. It came up, it just came right over our window wells, basement window wells, and we got, a little, and our next door neighbor, as another Mr. Harrison was saying, got his basement flooded to the, well, not his basement, his first floor was
Mhm.
flooded.
Yeah.
Just, I feel very lucky for that, but it made me think that, having a lot of right angles in a drainage system doesn't seem like a great idea. And a matter of inches can make a lot of difference to what happens to people.
So
It
two-
does.
two points I'll
You're
follow
absolutely
up.
correct.
Yeah, 2 points I'll follow up on. A BMP is a water quality device in general, and that typically goes for the 1-year storm or a storm size that it's typically about an inch of rain. So that's not what's causing these floodings, but you take a little bit off the top of that storm. And the other thing they do, they lengthen the flow path, that they increase the time of concentration, and that gives the faster washing water a chance to get out of the way.
Yeah.
So that's helpful in that way. And then every little bit helps if you can do like a treatment train throughout the neighborhood, then that can take shave the peak off, and that's what we're talking about, like trying to get a little bit of volume to in the upper areas and a little bit here and there to make a difference in those key areas. And right where anywhere there's a right angle, that's an efficiency loss, and that causes water to back up.
Mhm.
Well, thanks a lot. I do appreciate the work you did on this. It's fascinating. I've only scratched the surface of it, and I hope we get a copy of the various slides you showed. I think they gave some additional information that wasn't in the report that got circulated.
We will post either the presentation itself or a PDF of the presentation up on the website.
Thanks a lot again for the work you've done.
Sure.
Okay, next we have a question from Eugene and Susan Ebner.
We can't hear you. You'll need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Didn't know how to do that. Thank you. This is Eugene Ebner. Also greatly appreciate the work you did on the study and appreciate the briefing tonight. The question that I have is that you had mentioned that other neighborhoods other than River Falls have experienced similar drainage and flooding issues to us, and that we have to compete for resources within the county budget. Can you tell us what quantitative or other criteria are used to prioritize funding for projects such as these in that budget?
Well, I'm speaking of the whole Department of Transportation budget. There are safety improvements that, so historically the storm drain budget is very small. But we do have occasions where there are, there's areas that lack storm drain infrastructure, or, so they do get funded. But
So I think the question is like how, when determining where projects are done, how they compete with each other. And I think,
That is correct. What
Yeah.
criteria are used to determine funding for our projects versus funding for other similar type projects in the budget for other neighborhoods or other items? How do you prioritize our project to get funding?
Each program has,
How do you evaluate it?
yeah, each program has kind of its own cost benefit types of calculations they do. There's also obviously the political consideration once you go for like a CIP project. The county also has the equity and inclusion areas. They've marked out specific areas of low income and underserved communities that they're also trying to add some additional focus onto. So there's a number of criteria that go into that. But for us, it's generally, the areas with the most property damage first or the most safety issues. So if there's washing out of a roadway, if there's frequent accidents or frequent damage to vehicles or houses and things like that, those usually get knocked up to the top.
Yep.
But unfortunately, there's a lot of those too. And I would say that we probably don't have a great way besides just looking at the cost of the project versus the number of people affected by the issue, and prioritize those that help the most people for the least amount of cost. Other than that, again, unfortunately, there's many flooding circumstances throughout the county where we've had property damage. So it's definitely a difficult process. And I don't know much about the CIP, the capital improvement project selection process, but that's done by the county council. So
You had mentioned the cost benefit ratio. I didn't notice one in the report. Is one going to be developed?
So for each individualized project, that would be what we would do moving forward, is looking at what smaller projects could be undertaken that would provide the most amount of benefit. It's a lot more involved. But that will be upcoming.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Okay, and we have another question from Jeff Gagliardi.
Me?
Oh, no. We could hear you for a second.
I'm
Yep.
You're unmuted now.
there you are. So I had a couple follow-up questions based on some of the additional discussion we had. I was curious, how common or how prevalent is for a storm drain system not to meet the 10? The sub part of that is that when evaluating, let's say, other locations in Montgomery County that might also not meet the 10, based on our site conditions, how do we fall in the severity relative to other locations?
So you're breaking up a little bit. I think I got the gist of your question. So it's pretty common in older neighborhoods. In older neighborhoods, it's difficult, especially prior to, I think, 1971, when WSSC transferred its storm. So WSSC used to do the storm drains for the county, and they passed it over to DOT, I think, in 71. So everything before then, there was a records transfer from WSSC, which was not amazingly complete. But we don't have a lot of access to the calculations they were using, but we do know for the most part that before, at least most of the century, they were constructing to the 10-year, but they were probably using prior rainfall intensity calculations and also runoff coefficient calculations. Again, rainfall intensity is based on historic storms. The amount of data and the quality of that data has improved substantially over time. So I think that the data they were using was probably not as good. So anyway, the way to get is, these storm drains, a lot of them were probably met the 10-year at the time they were constructed, but under current criteria do not. However, there are many neighborhoods in the county that some don't even have storm drains at all, or any kind of drainage. Storm drains aren't the only way to provide drainage. We also have a lot of places in the county we have called open section, where they've got, and actually the Fawcett Farms above you is this kind of situation where there's really not a lot of storm drains. It's all roadside swales and things like that. But areas like Glen Echo Heights, and Cabin John, and areas like that, they have no storm drains at all, and no roadside swales. Everything basically just flows off onto the surrounding properties, and then eventually into the backyards, where it floods down between the yards and down to MacArthur Boulevard. So there's definitely areas in the county, very old areas that are extremely, better way to put it, underserved by storm drains. They just don't have storm drains at all. So I would say that it's unfortunately not very uncommon. I think that the real significant issue in River Falls is the fact that you've got this very large storm drain system running perpendicular to your streets, with low spots in the streets that cause these issues. A lot of neighborhoods that have undersized storm drains, the storm drain runs along the street, and so when it floods, it just flows down the street, which is still can be dangerous and still can cause damage and flooding, but it's less of an issue for property damage for the most part. So I would say that your neighborhood's probably one of the worst as far as getting homes flooded with an existing storm drain system, but probably not one of the worst if you take into account those that don't have storm drains at all.
And also
Just
just
one
add,
follow-up
I'll just
question.
add to that, that it's very rare that we do it this in depth of a study. We don't usually get the money, or we have the funds to try to pinpoint things this accurately.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Just a quick follow-up question. Looking at the maps, thinking about what's efficient, what's possible. The emphasis, as you just pointed out, is the flooding of the home. That's what everybody cares about. Wondering, as part of our system, let's say, obviously we can't rip it all up and replace it with economically, physically. Is there any other alternative that's being looked at? Let's say, make it larger in certain areas, but then make it so that if it does flood out of the system, it floods out in an area which can then naturally flow out, let's say, into the soccer field by the community pool, somewhere that it's not going to impact the homes. Is there any design criteria like that would lessen the flooding to the homes, maybe not cost as much? It would still involve flooding, but I think there's maybe a happy medium in there where it would be more effective for the
Yes, I mean, that would be an ideal solution. We don't have the solutions yet, but yeah, that's if flooding in an area that doesn't have infrastructure or safety issues is, again, it's temporary, and then as the rain stops, it recedes. That's an acceptable practice, right? So we look at that, and that could be some of these BMPs do it on a very minor scale, but if you do it repeatedly upstream, so then you're holding that flooding upstream, maybe along the side of the road, but in an area that it's not flooding somebody's house because they're not in a sump location. If we can do that, that's sort of the same idea that we're talking about with a series of BMPs. If we can't find that, that would be great, like you described, where you could just flood a soccer field, and that would be fine. It would be out of use for a week or whatever until it dried up. But in this case, and maybe it's more these rain gardens or bioswales or something upstream that allows that minor flooding to occur, alongside the road, but not damaging any property or utilities.
And there's a whole host of BMPs in that toolbox, and so when we look at the areas down by the pool and every little area along Coach Street and River Falls and Hackamore, we're going to be evaluating what are our options here. Okay, we might have A, B, C, D, or whatever it would be, to come up with the best options in there. And every situation is going to be different in there. And that's just that's our next step. That's what we're going to be looking at is how to, resolve the flooding issues into here.
I don't have any more questions, Matt.
Okay, well, it's getting late, so we can wrap it up. So I'm going to, we'll put this presentation up on the website, the drainage study website. I'm going to, in the next week or two, try to answer any questions that were put in through the registration system. And then if anybody has any additional questions, Lori, is there another way now to put any questions into the website or not?
No, but they can email you.
Okay, yeah, if you have any questions that weren't answered, you can send me an email, and then I can put that into the document, or just answer you directly, depending on what the question is. If it's something related to, not completely related to study, but I'll try to put up a kind of a Q&A sheet on the website, and then Lori just stuck my email address in the chat. So, and I think it's up on the website as well. Thank you everybody for coming. We do understand that this is stressful and a difficult situation for you, and we are trying as best we can to come up with a reasonable solution to assist and remediate some of these issues. So we will be continuing to work on this, and you will hear more from us in the future. So thank you, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.